All right, thank you everyone once again for joining us for our webinar today. This is part of our webinar series, but this one is special because we are conducting Saving Special Places Week as part of Chesapeake Conservancy. This is our week-long giving and awareness challenge to raise awareness and funds for our programs, which would go to support land conservation and stream restoration throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So as part of these programs, data is really the centerpiece to everything that we do here. We can't make sound conservation policies or plans without really knowing what's on the ground and how we can protect it. So everything that we do is powered through our data team here, which we'll be covering in today's presentation with our presenters, Dr. Mike Evans and Lewis Kettle, who have prepared a great presentation for us. But this is a really special thing, and it's really this again the centerpiece to our programs here at the Conservancy. So it's our pleasure to tell you a little more about what we're doing here as part of the Conservation Innovation Center. So to get things started, just to introduce Dr. Mike Evans. Mike is Deputy Director of the Conservation Innovation Center and lead data scientist. His work focuses on developing new ways to use data and technology to improve conservation decision-making prioritization decisions. Many of the projects apply deep learning approaches to remote sensing to better understand land use dynamics. And he earned his PhD in natural resource management from University of Connecticut, master's degree in ecology, evolution, and behavior from University of Buffalo, and a bachelor's in biology from Oberlin College. Lewis Kettle is also on Mike's team, is Conservation Data Program Manager at the Conservancy. He works with the geospatial team to apply precision conservation technology to conservation and restoration projects both within and outside the watershed. He's earned his master's degree in geospatial sciences from University of Maryland in College Park. So they have some really exciting things to present to you today, and including some new programs and new data that will be coming out later this year. So as we're doing this, there'll be a Q&A session at the end, but feel free to use the Q&A button to put in your questions so we can screen them and we'll have them answered later on. So with that being said, I'll pass it over to Mike.
Awesome. Thanks, JT. Appreciate the introduction and really excited to see the participation, everybody joining. I know Lewis and I are happy to be sharing some of the exciting work and data sets and tools that are coming out of the CIC. And the theme, as JT mentioned today, is to really talk about this theme of precision data, precision conservation. So we're going to be focusing on data sets and tools that help us achieve this goal of precision conservation, which we will define here in a second. There we go. So very quickly, I assume by folks participating in this webinar, many of you are familiar with the Conservancy's work, but in case those that aren't, we are a regional conservation nonprofit organization focused on conserving and restoring the cultural and environmental resources of the watershed. And I always include this graphic before giving a presentation, just as a reminder of how big and diverse an area the watershed actually encompasses. I've given presentations sharing our work in places up in New York, and folks have looked at me sideways wondering, why is somebody from the Chesapeake Bay talking to us up in New York State? And I have to remind them that, yeah, New York also contributes to the conditions in the Bay. And a lot of our work is guided by this strong partnership we've had with the Chesapeake Bay program, which consists of collaboration of federal, state, and local agencies, the main federal players of which are the EPA and USGS. So I'm talking about precision conservation. What do we mean by that? I really like this tagline, getting the right practices in the right places at the right time. Basically, we believe that with better, more accurate, and more up-to-date data, conservationists can be more efficient and effective. We know that conservation is working with limited resources, and so there's a priority on making sure that we're spending our efforts in the places where they're going to get the most bang for their buck. And that's really what this idea of precision conservation and data-driven decision-making is about. We want to use data to be as deliberate as possible with the places that we are investing efforts into to either conserve or restore. And so to illustrate how we have been contributing to this movement, we're going to focus on 4 data sets and then the tools that we have derived from those data sets. So these are really exciting, groundbreaking data that nobody else had produced or really had before the CIC generated them, and then describe the tools that are applying those data sets to decision-making processes. So we're going to cover 4 data sets: high-resolution land cover, high-resolution hydrography, up-to-date wetland data, and up-to-date solar array data. And just by the descriptions, I think most folks will be able to tell that these are either hot button or very relevant topics in conservation in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So I'll begin with, I think, what has become our most visible, probably well-known data product, that's high-resolution land use land cover. What we're talking about when I talk about land cover data are spatial data sets, pictures that categorize the type of land cover at any given point on the landscape. So we want to know, is this spot impervious surface? Is it tree canopy? Is it an ag field? That's what land cover is describing. And the data that we've produced is the most precise and finest resolution available. So it's 1 meter resolution pixels. And those pixels encompass 12 different land cover classes. And as of our last iteration, 54 different types of land use. Just to further clarify terms, the distinction between land cover and land use, you can think about it. Land use really has a human use lens. So land cover is just describing what physically is on the surface of the earth at that point. Is it trees? Is it water? Is it low vegetation? That's land cover. Land use encompasses things like residential development versus agriculture, versus urban development, right? These are uses as defined by humans. And these data are used for all types of different analyses that are relevant to conservation. You're going to see one such application in a tool that we've developed, a couple of tools that we developed using these data. But first, just to illustrate why they're so groundbreaking and important, here's an image of a location on the eastern shore in Maryland. This is what you would see if you're flying over in an airplane. And before the CIC created these data, the best that we could do was characterize the land cover at this 30-meter pixel resolution. So each square is 30 meters by 30 meters on the ground. And as you can see, you lose a lot of detail in terms of what is actually on the landscape. All the red areas represent impervious surface, and we've lost track of what buildings are where. It's all sort of aggregated into these blobs. Roads sort of disappear. So it's not very precise if we want to be specific about understanding what is on the landscape. Compare that to the 1 meter resolution product that the CIC produced, and you can see there's much more detail, much more ability to account for the different land cover that is on the landscape in any given location, and how that's going to affect different environmental outcomes. And so the distinction between these two slides that I'm flipping back and forth between is illustrating the translation from land cover to land use. So this is our land cover color scheme, where you've got forest in dark green, low vegetation in light green. And I want you to pay attention to the light green, low vegetation. All sorts of things you can imagine fall into that category. And land use lets us distinguish between, say, lawns, agriculture, pasture. Those are now showing up in like the peach, orange, and brown tones. So just to do that transition again, land cover, light green. Anything that's low vegetation is light green. But that consists of many different potential land uses that get then discriminated in this data set. And the reason that's important is because these data are used, among other things, to understand what is going into the bay from the land. And you can imagine that a lawn is contributing very different sets of nutrients, pollutants, et cetera, than, say, an agricultural field. Excuse me. So the other thing that we're able to do with these data is characterize land use change, because we've produced them at now 3 different time steps. So what you're seeing here is an image from the same location in Frederick, Maryland in 2013 and in 2017. And you can see there's a big residential development that has taken place. Our land use land cover change data characterizes not only the changes in land cover, such as where you see new red buildings appearing, but also changes in land use, where you had potentially the same land cover from time 1 to time 2, that is now a different land use. I'll draw your attention to the bottom right portion of each of these images. On the right side of the screen, you'll see sort of light beige highlight showing that a low vegetation land cover was once, I believe, agriculture or pasture, and now it's still low vegetation, but because there's a bunch of houses there, it's lawn. And those land uses have very different environmental implications. So we're tracking all this as new data become available. And these data have always been made publicly available for download by county or state. We've also provided them in a web viewer that's going to be getting updated with the third iteration of data, but this is a scroll through to see the sort of detail that you can access in that land cover viewer. You can scroll between land cover on the right and then use on the left. So feel free to visit the URL at the bottom there, zoom to whatever place you are interested in or care about, and quantify, measure what sort of land cover land uses on the train at that point. Bruce, did you want to talk about the Anne Arundel tree canopy? So this is one of the applications of these data.
So one of the applied uses of this data was to create kind of a tree canopy assessment for Anne Arundel County in Maryland. What we did was take a look at the tree canopy in 2013 and in 2017. And by differencing these two data sets, we could identify in very high resolution where tree canopy was being lost, as shown by that example at the top there, in that red outline on the left. And then also where tree canopy was seeing gains. Granted, with gains, tree canopy crown growth is more gradual, so it's a little bit more subtle to capture. But when you have, a time period spanning more than 5 years, that starts to become a lot more apparent. And so when we did this study, we found that there was a net loss of about 2,300 acres. This rate of loss was faster than any other Maryland county at the time, according to best estimates. And in a win for conservation, this analysis helped provide the numbers and the data to support the Forest Conservation Act in Anne Arundel County. So very exciting use of the data, and this has also inspired other estimates at the state level in Maryland to improve forest policy.
Thanks, Louis. And we're going to see how those land cover data intersect with some of the other data sets I'm going to describe in additional tools later on, but that was a really thing. I love that example of just how having an accurate understanding of land cover has helped change conservation policy. One of the data sets that we are pairing with our land cover data is one we're very excited about, and that frankly I think is underappreciated, but is really going to knock people's socks off once it gets out there. And that's our hyper-resolution hydrography data, which is a mouthful to wrap your head around if you're not a hydrologist. But it's very exciting. It is basically a unprecedented effort to map the streams of the Chesapeake Bay watershed in unprecedented detail and completeness. So we did this in collaboration with experts at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, specifically Professor Matt Baker's lab. And it was a completely different approach to mapping streams and stream channels than has been done before. We started with digital elevation data, which is the grayscale image you're seeing underneath the stream channels here, and used sophisticated machine learning and computer vision algorithms to identify actual channels that we think hold water and represent streams. And so why this is important is because this method detects about 2.5 times as many stream miles as exist in the current best authoritative data set. So what does that look like? We'll stay in the neighborhood of Frederick, Maryland here. You can see there's a lot of mixed forest and agriculture. And what you're seeing in purple is the National Hydrography data set. So this is the federally produced authoritative standard stream data that pretty much everyone uses if they want to quantify or analyze where water is on the landscape and how it interfaces with the land. This is what everyone had been using. What you're going to see appear overlaid in blue are all the stream networks, or all the streams, excuse me, channels that our hyper-resolution hydrography data has identified. And so just real quick to do that overlay again, hopefully you can see what's impressive to me about this is just how many more small headwater streams are included in our hyper-resolution data set that were just completely missed if you're doing analysis with the national hydrography data. And so why is this important? You might ask, why do we care about all these small little headwater streams? Well, these are the places where the land is interfacing with the water. And so this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of where things that are happening on the land affect the quality of the Chesapeake Bay. So a really good example, here we have a comparison of the two data sets. So you can see at the bottom, the red line going in sort of a horseshoe is the existing national hydrography data. The blue lines and the associated yellow buffer are the stream channels that we mapped in our hydrography data set. And I hope what's standing out here is that the red line completely misses the channel that is going right up to a livestock operation. You can imagine there's all sorts of things coming off of livestock operations. And the reason this example is notable is if you look at the mainstream channel where the red line exists, it looks like it's effectively buffered with trees. And so it might be gaining some protection from whatever fertilizer and manure is coming off of these fields. But if we account for the channel that our data set identifies, we see that there's actually this direct unbuffered input to that waterway coming straight off of this animal feeding operation. So that creates a very different understanding of the loading that's happening into the waterway here that we would have completely missed absent these data. And here's another very, very similar example, just from a different location. This is not unique, and it's the reason that mapping headwater streams is particularly important. These small channels that get missed in the NHD data are often the ones that are poking into farm fields that again are providing that interface between the land and the water, and it's super important to account for them if we want to be effective and efficient with where we're trying to restore water quality. So before I hand it back to Lewis to talk about one of the ways that we're applying these data, we've produced them for the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed and they're publicly available. So we've got this level of detail at scale and are working to use it to better understand those dynamics between land use practices and water quality.
All right, thanks, Mike. So, in the CIC, part of what makes our jobs exciting is to apply all of this really cool data to, the work that's going on in the watershed to conserve and restore, all kinds of different types of features. So one of the decision support tools that we helped build for the Virginia Environmental Endowment, and they're a group that provides a lot of grant funding for restoration work that happens within the James River watershed, was the James River Water Quality Improvement Program Restoration Planner. A bit of a mouthful, but great program and tool. What we did with this tool was to identify all of the stream miles that did not have any riparian forest buffers. And so what we mean by that are just, within a certain distance of a stream, any areas that do not have any kind of tree canopy or shrub cover that would act as a natural filter to any runoff of pollutants coming from adjacent lands. And so, these buffers are known as like the last defense between the waterways and any pollutants coming into the stream. And so we were able to use this data to provide summaries for different sub-watersheds within this region here. And what you're seeing on the screen are these sub-watersheds prioritized by percent forest buffer coverage along stream networks. And this is a really great way to just see high level where you have watersheds that could be improved with further restoration, further tree plantings, things like that. And so the tool was to help guide VEE as they select, grant proposals and applications for restoration work. to basically provide, a sense of direction to where dollars could have the most impact on the ground. And so within the tool itself, both VE and grant applicants could go in, they could interact with different data sets, like the hydrography data, the land cover. And then in orange here, we're showing what the riparian forest buffer restoration opportunities look like. And so in orange, you can just see what's highlighted as the areas that would benefit from additional tree plantings that you could then put in a proposal. And then using that information, a rubric was also created to essentially score individual properties from highest priority to lowest priority. And that would help guide funding dollars as well to the places that would see the most benefit from restoration.
Yeah, that's another great example of the type of data-driven decision-making that's been made possible by our data sets, right? You saw what Lewis was showing, how to identify those restoration opportunities, you needed both the streams and the land cover. And if you don't have one of those, let alone both of them, you would be a little bit lost in terms of finding the best place to try to restore water quality. So yeah, I really like that tool as a great example of how these data sets are being put into practice. So I'm going to switch gears here and talk about some of what I'm calling our next gen conservation tools. So the next two data sets and the outputs from them are exciting examples of how we are leveraging some of the cutting edge technological development. Specifically, both of the examples that we're going to talk about use this intersection of remote sensing data, artificial intelligence, and cloud computing to be able to identify, characterize, and track conditions on the ground or features on the ground that we were never able to map before. So just to clarify some terms before we get too into the weeds, when I'm talking about remote sensing data, I'm talking about data about the Earth's surface that's collected from planes or satellites. And so you might typically most commonly think of like an image from Google Earth, like what you're seeing here. But it's important to understand that these images aren't just sort of flat 2D pictures. They actually contain usually multiple types of information per pixel. So we call these bands. This image actually has information about the red, green, blue, and near infrared portions of the electromagnetic spectrum at every point on Earth. So there's actually a rich depth of information in remote sensing data. And these data actually don't have to be images at all in the typical sense. They can include laser or radar returns that give us information about the texture, moisture, or topography of the Earth's surface. So remote sensing data encompass all kinds of different information about the surface of the Earth. And many of these data sets exist in time series. So what you're seeing here are satellite images collected since the 80s of Annapolis. And what should jump right out, what jumps out to me is you can see actually track the just growth and expansion of suburban areas around the city. So remote sensing data not only have this rich information at any one point in time, they've got information about the surface over, in some cases, very long periods of time. So there's this incredible amount of information that we can use if we have a sufficiently powerful tool. And that's where our use of AI comes in. AI, not to complicate things, as we're talking about it, is the use of a type of inferential model called a neural network. That's what you're seeing the diagram of here. And a neural network is like fundamentally any other statistical model in that it takes some input data on the left, perhaps the different bands or pieces of information in remote sensing data, and it makes some sort of prediction or inference on the right, in this case, different categories of wetlands. And what's unique about neural networks and why they've become so transformative is everything that's happening in between. So all those green circles are logistic regression equations in and of themselves. And each circle takes in all the inputs from all the circles before it and passes its output to all the circles after it. And this dense interconnected network allows neural networks to learn things like conditionality between input variables, complex interactions between those variables, and also nonlinearity. So conditions or situations where a variable predicts something in one place, but it does not predict it in another. These networks can learn those types of complex relationships. They can also be organized to take advantage of the spatially explicit nature of remote sensing data. So we can organize those little circles into windows or kernels that are passed across an image and learn things like shape, edges, gradients. So we're using the spatial information that's present in a remote sensing image to understand something about the features that we're interested in detecting. And so these two things are advances from the typical way that we have mapped the Earth's surface in the past. Why does that matter? You know, I lead our AI work at the Conservancy, and I'm also trying to be the biggest critic, wet blanket on using AI. I really only want to apply it when we need it. And when we need it is when the things we want to map are complicated and require spatial context. So I want you to take a look at this image, and in your minds, tell me where all the forested wetlands are. It's really hard to do just looking at it. And in fact, our land cover data is not able to make this distinction. You'll see forested areas all get coded dark green, which means we identify them as tree canopy. But using traditional methods, we can't really tell whether it's a wetland or an upland forest underneath that tree canopy. So we need these more powerful tools that can look at complex relationships between data and also consider spatial context to hopefully find where wetlands are. And that's exactly what we did with our wetland mapping project. And the reason that we focused on wetlands is because they're really important ecologically, but they are also needed for compliance and regulation and enforcement of a lot of different environmental laws, both state, federal, and municipal. The existing wetland data, much like the existing stream data, also miss a lot of wetlands and are often very out of date. So we heard from a lot of partners the need for better wetland data. And we thought that they were a good candidate, as I just mentioned, for this deep learning and remote sensing approach because they are so variable throughout time and also depending on the geographic context. So what we want to do is train an AI model that can take some remote sensing data like this and basically delineate all the areas that we think are wetlands. So the way that we do that, to pull back the hood a little bit on this capability we've developed, is to take examples of known wetlands and known non-wetlands, which are indicated by the yellow and purple points in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And at each of these points, we punch out a chip of remote sensing data. And this includes soil characteristics, elevation data, the image of the landscape, and pair that with known examples of wetlands, and use this to train a neural network to take that information and map wetlands in new locations, which is exactly what we did. And we now have a model that is able to map wetlands automatically with extremely high accuracy. So to illustrate what that provides us, here, I believe this is an excerpt from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. What you're seeing on the screen are the existing national wetland inventory data. So these, again, are the publicly available authoritative wetland data sets. Wetlands are shown in green, streams in blue. These data are old. We apply our model to an area like this, and we get a map that is much more complete, comprehensive, and accurate in terms of where wetlands are. So you can imagine this makes a big difference if you are, say, a conservation organization looking to conserve wetlands, or if you're a developer that needs to minimize and mitigate its impacts to wetlands. Knowing where these things are with an up-to-date understanding is critically important, and that's what our model provides. A couple examples to illustrate where this comes into play. The paired examples on the left, to me, provide really good illustrations of the strength or the advantage of having up-to-date data. The green polygons are showing wetland maps that were produced back in time that clearly don't reflect the current conditions. Our model outputs in purple are using up-to-date data and therefore able to automatically update those maps and show where wetlands still exist and where they've, in this case, been paved over. Similarly, the columns of images on the right show where our model is finding more complete mapping of wetland areas than exists in the National Wetland Inventory data. So I'm going to return to this example where I asked you to find the wetlands yourselves. And as we can see, our land cover data set does not try to find wetlands within forested areas. But with the advantage of this new AI model, we're effectively able to identify a whole host of forested wetlands in green and emergent wetlands in red in this area in Loudoun County. And so we've created these data sets for 16 counties in and around the watershed, and they're being used actually for a host of different purposes. We share the data with the Chesapeake Legal Alliance, who's using them in advocacy work to guide where utility right-of-ways go. We're sharing them with utility companies so that they can be more effective in their environmental compliance. We share them with land trusts in Loudoun County so that they can better prioritize parcels for conservation based on up-to-date understanding of where wetlands are. So there's a host of applications that these data are going towards. And we're excited to see what other uses they might be put to. We just shared them a couple months ago. The data that we have generated, if you want to explore it, is publicly available at the URL at the bottom of the screen for our wetland data viewer. And we hope to be sharing more counties as we're able to produce additional data sets. The last data set that I want to share, and we'll end on, that also uses these next-gen conservation techniques is our effort to map solar arrays throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So again, solar arrays needed more sophisticated mapping techniques because if you don't account for shape, spatial context, any given point of a solar array looks a lot like impervious surface and might be confused with buildings or roads. But if you're able to look at a solar array in its entirety, it's very obvious what it is, a solar array. And that's what the AI models and computer vision techniques we've been using is able to achieve. So this project that I'm going to be talking about in this data set was our effort to create the first map of solar arrays throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And we wanted to do that to understand where solar had been built, but also to predict where it was going. So again, the challenge here is to be able to look at a satellite image, an overview of the Earth, and automatically finds the thing we're interested in this case, solar arrays. I won't ask you to strain your eyes to do that because we've trained an AI model to do that for us. And per the purple polygons that appear, all the large ground-mounted solar arrays in this area outside of Rockville, Maryland. And with this trained model, we were able to scale up this analysis and, like I said, create the first map of solar arrays across the entire watershed. And we did this through taking advantage of the third tool that I mentioned, which is cloud computing. So this type of analysis in the past would be prohibitively expensive in terms of time and cost because an analyst would have to go out, download all the satellite imagery for the watershed, train a model, try to run it on their local computer, which may or may not be powerful enough, and then hopefully produce a map at the end. What we're taking advantage of is the fact that there are now cloud computing resources in the form of virtual computers that live in data centers, as well as satellite imagery that is stored in the cloud. And so now our analysts can write a script, send that off to a network of virtual machines, which can also read those remote sensing data, sometimes in many tiny little pieces, produce a map quickly, put it back together, and send that back to the analyst. So this is increased exponentially our ability to scale these types of analyses so that we can produce data for the entire watershed, and not just for one time step. As I mentioned, satellite imagery, remote sensing data has been collected over time. So with the solar array data, we were actually able to create data sets showing the footprint of solar arrays each year from 2017 through 2022. And we've shared those in this web viewer. So what you're seeing in yellow is the growth, if I play that back, the growth of solar arrays in the Chesapeake Bay watershed since 2017. And this was made possible because we're able to use AI, cloud computing, and remote sensing data to quickly scale that mapping. With this information in hand, we as I said, we're able to predict or model where solar was likely to go next. We've seen where it was developed. We know the conditions at those locations where it existed, and so we use that statistical relationship to create heat maps identifying the places where solar was most likely to come quickly and where it was most likely to be developed in the next 10 years. And so what you're seeing here are areas in the watershed where we think solar is really unlikely to go in black, and the bright yellow places are where we think solar is most likely to go in yellow. And two things I want to draw your attention to. One, the precision of this is relatively high. If you look at some of the zoomed in insets of these maps, you can see specific fields are highlighted as more likely than others. And we also were able to account for differences in rates between states. So the bottom right inset, there's kind of this very distinct vertical line dividing bright yellow versus a more muted orange. That's the boundary between Maryland and Delaware. And the difference in the brightness or the likelihood of solar development in those places has to do with differences that we have seen in the states, basically past development of solar. So we know where solar is, we have an idea where it's going, and I'll hand it back to Lewis to talk about a tool that we developed to help guide where we would like to see solar go.
Thanks, Mike. So, solar is definitely a very exciting thing. It's part of the future, but without properly thinking through where, especially utility scale solar is going, it can actually have pretty destructive results, especially if a company decides that it would be best to, cut down a forest or just pave over valuable habitat in order to put in solar, in order to meet just the growing demands for energy throughout the watershed. That's where the Conservancy, we try to help guide where solar might go, that would basically be less destructive for valuable habitats, be more nature positive, as we like to call it. And the way we go through this is to prioritize optimal sites. We look at ground-mounted preferred sites that do not target prime farmland for agricultural communities and avoid ecologically sensitive lands. And then hopefully with this data also help to guide just policies and incentives for where solar development might occur that is in harmony with everything prior to that. So, there are definitely examples of solar that can go in that are just a win for everyone. A couple examples include companies that have moved forward with either rooftop solar, like in the case with this Target in Middle River, Maryland, or even putting in solar canopies over parking lots like IKEA in Baltimore. So one project that we did in St. Mary's County, Maryland, was to identify optimal opportunities for solar in areas such as degraded lands, landfills, and again, parking canopies, rooftops, and perhaps public lands that were not as desirable or impactful for the environment. And then also looking at ground-mounted opportunities on preferred sites, as I mentioned in the previous slide. So in the county, what we did was looked at, an array of different opportunities, and this was just to help provide a guidance to just the universe of opportunity out there for both utility scale and smaller scale solar implementation. In red, you can see all the different structures that could be suitable for rooftop solar. We also identified, school parcels that might be more conducive to certain educational solar implementation, and also, other lands that are less desirable that potentially could be more nature positive, like landfills, degraded lands, that sort of thing.
Yes. Thanks, Louis. Yeah, so you can see that the siting of solar in a nature positive fashion grew off of the high resolution land cover data, for instance, to identify specific buildings and parking lots. And one thing that we're excited to incorporate from the new work that I just shared regarding mapping wetlands is to basically use our updated and more accurate understanding of wetlands to further refine the places that we think make sense for solar to go in terms of being environmentally friendly and ecologically conscious. So that's those are the four data sets and some of the derived tools and capabilities that we wanted to share just to give a flavor of the types of projects, the type of work that the CIC is leading, and some of the impacts that we're having throughout the watershed with those tools that we are making publicly available. So with that, my hope is that what we shared sparks some ideas, sparks some questions, and I believe we have some time, so hopefully have a discussion here for a little bit based on what we've shared, and yeah, love to hear folks' reactions. So thank you.
Mike and Louis, thank you so much. This is really informative, and we appreciate the details. I love seeing the maps and the information that you're able to glean from a lot of these images to make sound policy decisions. I also want to note too that we are using this data in-house to be able to dictate what we're doing in our Pennsylvania stream restoration programs. I know Mike and Louis aren't as involved in those in our boots on the ground efforts, but we do have other webinars that we've done in the past that can highlight and give you a little more detail into how the data is being used on the ground. So I'll refer you to those, and we can probably include those, the webinar recording in an email that's going to go out to everyone afterwards. But just to get the questions started here, and again, if anyone has any questions, they can put it in the Q&A box. But Mike and Louis, I know you're using this data. The CIC is giving it to government entities, to local land trusts, which you've highlighted. And I know that you're trying to get as granular as possible with it, and that'll come with future research and development efforts. But from what you've been working on and the vision that you have for the future of this, what would you like to see the application being for landowners? Most of us here on the call here, we're not working for larger groups, and we have our own parcels of our property here or ones that we're looking to buy in the future. How might this be applied in future opportunities with additional research?
Yeah, that's a great question. Traditionally we haven't gotten down to individual property owners with a lot of our decision support tools. However, that's definitely not out of the realm of possibility. We actually have a project currently in Harford County, Maryland, where we are going to create a tool to help guide conservation actions for just the average landowner. We're looking into things like using our land cover to estimate, just how much acreage of different land cover types you have on your property, potential restoration or conservation practices that you could put in, whether it's a rain garden to help capture some of the runoff, or, putting in things like native pollinator habitats. Perhaps it's reducing the amount of fertilizer that you put on your lawn, or how often you mow. If you were to convert some of that lawn to like a pollinator habitat, that kind of thing. And we've also been looking at just visualizing how water is flowing across your landscape. Perhaps it's identifying where there are certain natural depressions or water pools, and different things that you can do to help deal with runoff and pollutants and that kind of thing. So that hasn't been a traditional focus up to this point, but we are starting to kind of experiment and head in that direction as well.
Thank you. And I've been going through the data and the various maps, the new tools that you all produce, just to toy around with them to see what's there. And what I love is being able to see the connection that we all have with the ecosystem and our environment, to see where streams are in relation to habitats, or like you said, where the water flows. And I think it's such valuable information, whether we can use it practically in this sense, or at least me in my personal capacity, or just have a fuller picture with my understanding, with my connection with what's beyond my property line. And I think it's very valuable here. So just go to our group questions here. So first one is, uh, regarding the hydrography data, are ephemeral streams seen in the new mapping?
Yes, if I'm understanding the question correctly, the new map catches everything that is in the existing national hydrography data set, so that's all the federal streams, navigable waters of the US. And in addition to those, also finds these smaller, sometimes ephemeral headwater channels. So the new data is a superset of existing understanding and maps of federal streams.
Next one here, just a point of clarification on the map of Anne Arundel County. There was a point where it showed land cover and land loss in one portion. Is that the case? And could you explain why that might be, if that's the case?
Get back, but
Yeah, let's see.
Let me do a reference back there.
Yeah, so in the case of Anne Arundel County, we used the land cover data to map tree canopy coverage for 2 points in time. On the left, we had mapped tree canopy in 2013, and then in the right, we had tree canopy coverage in 2017. And so what we did was perform an analysis looking at where tree canopy was either lost or gained between those two dates. And then, after doing that difference, we had a net loss of tree canopy after all the acreages were added and subtracted. If that makes sense.
I wonder if it's also, I'm realizing it might be helpful to clarify that each row is a different location. So they look kind of similar, but those are two different spots where in one spot there was loss and the other spot there was gain. That was the confusion maybe.
That's a good point.
That makes sense. Thanks for the clarification. Next question here. You mentioned that at this level of resolution, it doesn't exist anywhere else. Will this data set development process be available, replicated across the United States with other federal partners?
That's the million or
Great question.
more accurately $1 billion question. I assume we're talking about the high resolution land cover data. There's, yeah, is that JT? Do you know, is that the focus of the question?
Let's see here. It doesn't really necessarily specify, but I think let's start with land use land cover data, and then maybe you can get a little more detail into the other tools you have.
Sure. Yeah, so high resolution land use land cover or land cover data, it's currently kind of a holy grail in terms of data sets for conservation. And the state of development is there's an interesting sort of intersection between a bunch of conservation groups like ourselves that are exploring ways to scale up what we've done here to the entire country. There's also been a growing private sector space. There's a handful of companies that have AI-based methods that could generate these data for the entire country as well. And so the question really comes down to what entity is going to take ownership for creating and maintaining those data. Historically, it's been a federal agency like USGS, but if conservation groups or a for-profit company is producing the data, then it becomes less clear who's maintaining them. One model would be that the federal government pays for either of those entities to produce the data and the government hosts it. I think we know that there's some challenges to that approach currently. There's also the question of capacity and, quite frankly, price tag. The data are really valuable and a lot of folks want them. So private companies are able to charge a premium for them. And thus far that has been the main prohibition against, a nationwide publicly available adoption. On the other hand, there's a reason that they're expensive, and groups like the Conservancy would have to do a significant amount of fundraising and sort of investment to build up the infrastructure to be able to produce them across the whole, even coterminous United States. So that was the long-winded answer. I think the shorter answer is our methods, other groups' methods are already at the point where they could scale, and it's a question of who has the resources and capability to take ownership of that process and then shepherd those data to the public in the future. And that's what a lot of folks are thinking about and working on.
And that leads to the next question here regarding the availability of data and how much detail you can get. I know you've mentioned and you've shown that a lot of this is available on our website, but for more targeted projects that you'd have, how does that work to work with the CIC on that regarding availability, but also for doing things on a contract basis?
Yeah, we definitely welcome folks to just reach out with their use case or interest, and we can have a follow-up conversation. The CIC, we work with different counties, nonprofits, we support the state and other partners on different needs on how to apply the data. So, feel free to reach out to any of us. Yeah, we'd be happy to discuss.
Yeah, and along those lines, could you go into a little more detail about why we want this data available and why we produce it on our website? I know there are other groups that can keep it to themselves, and it's all based upon either a fee for service or an access model. But could you talk about why we have it out there for everyone?
A good shot. Yeah. First, I mean, it really comes down to our mission and values. The land cover data provides a great example. The reason that we're producing any of these data sets is because we want to empower precision conservation and ultimately protect and restore the environment in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Like, that's why we're doing what we're doing. And so in most cases, we believe the best way to do that is to share the data freely so that collaborators, partners, and other groups can amplify our efforts. We can only be, the Conservancy can only be in so many places at once in terms of actions on the ground, but we can give high-resolution land cover, high-resolution hydrography data to a whole network of implementers and action partners that can actually go affect the change. So the reason that we share it is it comes down to our mission. And yeah, there certainly are groups that are providing these data. I mean, the previous conversation about land cover data is a testament to that. There's for-profit private companies that have figured out how to produce high-res land cover data, and they are selling it for profit, which is their prerogative. But there's definitely value to those data if we wanted to go that route. But our mission and our value system dictates that we want to get them in as many people's hands as possible.
All right, next question is about the AI wetland data and ground truthing. You had listed a figure of 90%, and the question was wondering if that was baseline or after ground truthing and improvement, and how you go about doing that.
That's a great question. It's something that we're in the process of. So we ourselves have not had the ability to go out and put boots on the ground to ground truth those data. What we are doing is sharing them with folks that do regularly go out and do wetland surveys to try to validate them. So specifically, we've shared the data with Ducks Unlimited that's doing an updated wetland map in Pennsylvania. And so they have their scientists that are doing their wetland delineation. They're comparing that to our data. And based on the feedback we've gotten from them so far, our data are quite accurate and useful in their efforts. I think I also mentioned that we're sharing it with utility companies so that they can better avoid wetlands. And those organizations are also required to go out and do wetland surveys whenever they're either creating or maintaining right of ways. So they're also providing field validation data. So there's some I don't want to say one-off, but like not systematic, opportunistic use cases where we're doing boots on the ground validation. And if there's anyone on this call that either is in the business or hobby of doing wetland survey, I encourage you to please reach out, because we're always eager for more ground truth data to actually see how well the model's doing.
Great. Well, thank you both. That's the questions we have today. So we'll be wrapping up right now. I just want to thank everyone for joining us for this very informative session. And as a reminder, again, we are in the middle of Saving Special Places Week. The goal is to raise over $100,000 for conservation programs, of which the CIC and the data programs are a part of it. And the funds that are coming in are so valuable because, as Mike and Lewis mentioned here, some of these data sets we produce are done on a contract basis. However, there's so much research and development that goes into them, and laying the groundwork for these larger things, doing this AI work that may not pay off in the next few years, but will for the entire conservation movement. And we need to get that on that now to be able to do this work to counter the challenges that we're going to have for tomorrow. So your gift for Saving Special Places Week will be going to support these and the many efforts that we're doing for the Chesapeake Conservancy. So I hope you will make a contribution this week and help us out. Again, we'll be sending out this recording and additional details and information on emails that will be going out. Please stay in contact with us, follow us on social media, and we hope to have you on our next webinar. Thanks so much.
Everyone.
Thanks all.